is okay, did I start using Zoom? I guess I'll just keep going. Okay, so Edna is a professor at UNCG in the teacher education and higher education department. She is a science education person and has done tons of work with students both in school and out of school. We talked about what she might talk about for this presentation, and she elected to tell stories about the kids and the activities that they engaged in. Am I right, Edna? Okay. So it's up to you now.
Okay, so do I start sharing now? Is this good? Alrighty, thank you, Colleen. And thank you everybody for your invitation. I'm really glad to be here. So I have titled the talk, Moving Beyond Equity as Inclusion, Working Towards Rightful Presence in Science or STEM, Teaching and Learning. So STEM is STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. And as an acronym, it's been taken up. You know, it's fairly popular in K-12 schools. Some schools that we work with, they call their science classes STEM classes. So anyway, in the talk, there will be some science and there will be some engineering, but some teachers and schools just regard this whole package as STEM. And before I begin, I want to say that all the stories and all the work that I share from this talk is done in collaboration. My longtime intellectual partner, Professor Angela Calories-Barton, is at UMich, and we've also worked with and continue to work with youth and teachers, grad students, and lots of community members. So this work is by no means done by myself because it's impossible to do so. Okay. So the idea of why we want to think about a rightful presence in STEM. So what does a rightful presence mean? If we are considering the idea of rightful presence, it means that some people and some students, particular groups of students, do not have that presence in STEM. So the field talks about inequities in STEM. And if you look at the achievement gaps, I guess that's one way of putting it, right? So children are tested in science, in particular grade levels. In North Carolina, the first big test is in of white.
Edna, we lost you for a minute. Maybe it's more than a minute. And it was going so well. Yeah.
Where should I go back to? Achievement gaps?
Yes.
Okay. So as a field, we describe and understand the issue of inequities in STEM education for children when we look at how well or how not well they do in exams, right, in tests. And in North Carolina, the first big science test is in 5th grade, and then also in the high schools. And across the board, we can see that the white students are doing better than everybody else. Everybody else meaning students of color, Black students, Hispanic students, Native American students, Asian students. So everybody else as compared to white students are not doing as well. And this is historical, right? So for the past 40 years in America, this has been the trend. We also look at the lack of representation in STEM professional fields. So for example, if you look at scientists and engineers, and to some extent doctors, right? Again, they are overly represented by white professionals and overly represented by white males. So there is this concern that not everybody, right, have access and opportunities to quality STEM education. And even when students of color do well in tests, there is a troubling finding that they do not identify with STEM. So you can have, a Black student who's doing really well in science class, but has no desire to continue to pursue science or STEM because of this idea of an identity gap. And by that, I mean that students of color do not see role models who look like them in STEM fields. So if we look at some, I know the numbers are really small, right? So here are some statistics that I'm just going to draw your eye to a couple. This is from the National Science Board, and they track the science and engineering indicators who is graduating according to demographics. So you can see that even after, and this is from 2018 actually, even from after 30 years of education reform efforts, right? 67.6% of professionals in science and engineering are white, compared to 6.4% of Black professionals and only 8.4% of Hispanic professionals. And if you look at the indigenous population, it is at a really dismal 0.3%. Let's look at gender. The numbers have also budged very little, right? 28% of women in science and engineering occupations in 2018. And that is a really tiny increase from 22.4% in 1993. So what has this got to do with how we teach math and science in K-12 classrooms? What do these numbers tell us about STEM? And what STEM signals to students, right? And about the culture of STEM. So these are troubling numbers, in the professions, but they're also troubling labels in the K-12 arena. Right, so if we look at the labels, what comes to mind when we think about Title I schools? So some schools are labeled as Title I, and they are named as Title I because they serve a high percentage of students from low-income families. And Title I schools get that label because they are supposed to get more resources to help the students succeed. Right, so the goal is that if you go to a Title I school, your school is supposed to have more resources so that you can have access to opportunities and good quality education. However, that's not often the case, right? When we look at the descriptors of schools, we have high needs schools, we have high needs students, and oftentimes these schools, they are called high needs, and they're ranked by the number of unfilled teacher positions. So the teachers who teach in these schools are often unqualified. They have not gone through teacher training, or they are a lot of substitutes. There are often many vacant positions. Students who go to this school often are below the poverty line. So you have this really troubling set of factors, right, for these schools, because you have teachers who are not trained, you have high turnover teacher rate, and you have students living in poverty, students who are homeless, students who are in foster care, and a large percentage of students who are English language learners. But the thing to note that I want to stress here is that none of these labels, right, none of these labels say anything about the children's interest in STEM. None of these labels say anything about whether they have academic abilities that are below average, but that is often assumed from these troubling labels. And because they are assumed to be uninterested in STEM, they are assumed to not have the social capital to catch up in STEM, they are often not given opportunities to engage in STEM teaching and learning. So the narratives around high needs have typically been very deficit oriented, right? This is all this talk about what schools lack and what teachers lack and what children lack. And this overall packaging of this is an at-risk situation. Children who are at risk, teachers who are also at risk because they don't know what they're doing. Apparently they're not trained. And schools that are at risk, right? Because the schools are not doing well in the test and there are failing schools. So it's very deficit oriented. But there's this very good scholar, James G, and he talks about the fact that at risk simply means that the children, the students, do not need another bad learning experience. That's all at risk should mean. Again, I want to reiterate, none of the labels say anything about the children's interest in STEM or ability to learn and engage in STEM. But it is assumed that they do not have interest, and it is assumed that they do not have the ability to engage in STEM. So this is what I have been trying to frame the picture for us, right? What is the terrain of why particular groups of kids are not doing well in STEM? So where is the deficit? Where is the problem? Is it located in individual students, in their families, in their neighborhood, or in their school context? One of the big giants in education, Gloria Ledson-Billings, she talks about the fact that we need to change our language, right? We need to change how we describe issues. And she posits that we do not have an achievement gap, but instead we have an educational debt. So she's arguing that systemic injustices that are often disproportionately visited upon students of color, students who are poor, students who go to Title I schools, means that as a society, we owe these children an educational debt. So the gaze is shifted from the kids who are not doing well to society at large. What is it that we have not been doing? And what is it that we have consistently been doing to create this situation in which they are not, performing at the potential that they should be? So systemic injustices, if we look at that word, right, they are systemic not because they are uniform in nature. They are systemic in the sense that they are widespread and they are enduring. So historically, the injustices have been around, and geographically, broadly, the systemic, they have been systemic in that sense. They are widespread. So how do youth talk about their experiences in science or STEM? So here are some quotes that I'm going to share with you that the young people have told me and told our research team. And these are all young people who are of color. Some of them are recently resettled refugee children, but they're not the dominant white middle class citizen white students. So Sana, a 13-year-old African-American girl, she said, when you walk into some classrooms, you feel they don't want you there. And she was specifically talking about science classrooms. Teachers care, but they do not care about the community. We go outside on our own time, find places we can go and do science and engineering for our community. Schools doesn't know how to do that. And schools don't know that we do that. We need to tell our teachers how to do it. And this is Samuel and his friend. And they built a little free STEM library. This was in the process. They built a little free STEM library for the Boys and Girls Club because they felt that there was a need for their community, for their friends to have access to STEM materials. This is Jasmine, and this is from last year during COVID. Well, we are still living in COVID, but when COVID was starting. And she said, the racist stereotype is that Black people are not listening to science, but that is not true. Maybe it's the other way around, like science is not listening to us. I wish that people could see what I could do, what I'm doing at home. I'm making homemade hand sanitizers because there were no hand sanitizers at that point on the shelves in the stores. I'm making masks I'm caring for my elders. I don't want to act white. I don't want people to tell me I'm not white enough. I want you to know how I feel as a young Black girl in America and in STEM. I want to feel like I can be me in STEM and have that celebrated. And this one is from Quentin, and he wrote this letter to his science teacher when he was in 5th grade in January. So if you think about the school year, we start in September or last week of August. So he's been in the classroom for 1 semester, but he doesn't think that his teacher knows him. If you look at his letter, he says, "Hi, Mr. B, this is your student Quentin, the first one in the 2nd row. I'm going to tell you about things that we should do in science. I do things out of school and out of my after school STEM club at the Boys and Girls Club that involve science." And then he goes on to talk about how he went door to door in his neighborhood, giving away CFL lights in exchange for people's incandescent lights. And he was talking about the fact that CFL lights uses less electricity, and so people's bills can come down. And so Quentin was trying to tell his teacher that, hey, you know, actually I know a lot about science. I do this in my after school science club and you should know about it. And then the last sentence, right, he said, "It's not so much for science that I'm known, but for being a smart aleck." And we follow Quentin into his classroom, and he's often asked to sit in the hallway because he's clowning around. So the science teacher would kick him out of class. So how Quentin is in his after school science club is radically different, you know, from how he is and what he can do in his classroom science. So what are the youth saying about their belonging or whether they feel welcome in schooling in STEM and why? They are saying that they are invisible in school, right? They're made missing despite their embodied presence. Recall the quote, this is Quentin, the first one in the 2nd row. They are saying that the teachers notice them for their deficits and not for their strengths. They are saying that their hopes, fears, and dreams and worries are not part of teaching and learning science, at least explicitly. Like the science classroom does not take into consideration their hopes and fears and dreams and worries. That they have community science expertise, but it is not noticed nor valued in their school classrooms. And that in school, they have limited opportunities to have ownership over materials and activities. They're also saying that they're not recognized in school for who they are and what they want to know, and that they have to be white in order to be acknowledged. And these are all quotes from the kids themselves, the youth themselves. And they have to fight stereotypes on their own. Which brings the question about, you know, when we think about equity as inclusion, right? When we think about inclusion, the idea is that let's welcome somebody who has historically been not a part of our group, right? Whatever your group is, to come join our group, right? But when we think about equity as inclusion, the group, whatever it is something that has been solidified, right? It has the values, it has beliefs, it has practices that is already stable. And we are merely inviting somebody to join the group. The group itself does not change, right? So the idea of equity as inclusion is that the values, the beliefs, the ideals, and who has rights in this group are already predetermined. So extending rights only provides resources and approaches for making participation in the current construction of classrooms and disciplines possible. But then, if I may go back to the previous slide, the youth are saying that as currently constructed, they are made invisible in the school classroom STEM culture, and that they need to deny aspects of their identities in order to participate. So the challenge with making sense of why equity as inclusion doesn't go far enough is that the limits of inclusion are very difficult to see, right? Why? Because the goals of inclusion are important and remain important, but we are suggesting that they're insufficient. They're also hard to see because most of us are so enculturated through schooling, through STEM and society as it currently exists. And that for some of us, we may more rightfully belong in some ways because of our race and gender and sexuality and language that can blind us to experiences of others that are different from us. So it's really hard to see why we need to push beyond equity as inclusion. So my colleagues and I are trying to push the field to think about, rather than framing equity as inclusion, we need to frame equity as rightful presence. And by that, we mean that a legitimate membership in the classroom learning community should honor who the student is, what the student have to bring to the table, and not because of who the student should be. When a student has rightful presence in a learning community, they work collaboratively. Oh, sorry, my dog is playing with her toy. I should get rid of it. Hang on. Lumos, no. Okay, so when students have rightful presence, they should work collaboratively with others in the learning community to restructure power dynamics so that how they can participate, why they want to participate, and what they do during the participation can look different. So really, we are saying that for rightful presence to occur, we need to shift and change what is currently the normed culture of STEM, right? Which is really difficult to do. When we think about the consequences, right, or the importance of ensuring that all children, regardless of background, right, have a rigorous STEM learning experience, it is very important in terms of STEM because our society has a history of environmental racism and hierarchical relationships between those who know science and how to manipulate scientific findings and those who do not. So for example, right, with the Flint water crisis in Michigan that is still ongoing, even though the news is not covering it anymore, it is the children from low-income family, children of color who are disproportionately suffering from that, right? So that is a very current socio-scientific issue that is unfolding that, talks about this history of environmental racism. So I want to share a vignette, right, of a class, a science class that we observed, and we titled it Unless You Are Black. So this is a forensics class at a science museum where the teacher brought his 6th graders to the science museum to teach a science class on forensics. So Mr. A is a teacher, and he says that forensic science techniques are important in order to accurately find and convict the right criminal based on evidence. We need to be fair and use data as evidence. And Amir, who is Black, essentially shouted, unless you're Black. If you're Black, you'll be convicted. So Mr. A was sort of taken aback. And I want to pause and say that Mr. A is a really committed science teacher, and the children adore him. But he was sort of like, shaken. And he said, I like the passion in that statement, but let's make sure we talk about that somewhere else other than in this classroom. If you want to talk about that later, we can. So after the moment, Amir talked with us and he said, it's a very powerful thing to say, but at the same time, it's a challenging topic to talk about in front of a whole group of youth, when all these youth come from different backgrounds. And I gave Amir a smile, but I want him to know that, science class is not a place to bring up politics. So Amir's comment, unless you are Black, you will be convicted, put his rights as a Black boy who understands and who has experiences in his family of the criminal injustice system on Black bodies, which is relevant to the science, was silenced because the teacher was taken aback. And admittedly, teachers are not given the support, right, to engage in these kinds of conversations, even though I'm arguing that they should. Because this is the intersection of science and society and oppression and who students are and the struggles that they are negotiating. So what youth are and want would look very different in classrooms if they are more than guests, right? If students had a rightful presence in their classroom, we imagine that Amir would be able to, with his teacher's support, right, engage in this conversation and dig into why is it that there are racialized experiences in the criminal justice or criminal injustice system. And that will be something that is legitimate to talk about in the science classroom when we are studying forensics. The youth also bring up the idea that they are community science experts. Why? Because they say, we are insiders in our community. We are also learning science. And simultaneously, we see how science intersects with our lives in community. Who else can put these ideas together? We are community science experts. So to further illustrate the rightful presence framework, going beyond equity as inclusion, what we are arguing for is that the teachers and the principals, so the people in the school classroom who have authority, right, historically, and as schools set up, are the teachers and administrators. We are saying that in order for students who have historically been marginalized in STEM, students of color, right? Students who come from low-income backgrounds, students who identify as LGBTQ+, right? Who have been historically silenced in STEM, they need allies in the form of teachers and principals who have more power to figure out how to reauthor rights. So the right to reauthor rights is the first tenet of the Rightful Presence framework. I know it's sounding really academic right now, but I hope that the stories I tell will illustrate some of these points. We also suggest that rightfulness is claimed through presence. So making justice or injustice visible, we argue, is how rightfulness is manifested. So going back to the Amir example, unless you're Black, if Mr. A were able to take up what Amir, shouted, and the class could talk about the criminal injustice system, then we would argue that that is an example where rightfulness was happening. Rightfulness for Amir as a Black boy, negotiating these really stressful social situations and unfairness and injustice, has a rightful place in forensics in 6th grade. And there needs to be a collective disruption of the idea of a guest-host classroom relationality, where the students stop being the guest, the teacher stops being the host, and rights could be reauthored. So I want to stop here and talk a little bit about the guests, the relationship between a guest and a host, right? So we are often, when we are guests in our friend's house and our friend is the host, we are there at the pleasure of our friend who is the host, right? We are invited to do certain things, maybe to partake in a meal by the host. The host might invite us to stay for dessert, again, at the pleasure of the host. The guest typically cannot do anything unless the host extends the right to do so. And so if we map this idea into the classroom, the teacher is the host and the students are the guest, right? And then if we think about what the youth had told us earlier in the first couple of slides, they have perpetually been denied rights to participate. And so that's why we are pushing this Rightful Presence framework. So I'm going to tell you 4 stories. So here's where it should get less academic and hopefully more interesting and more illustrative. So 2 stories are from 2 different 6th grade classrooms where the students were engaged in an engineering unit. And then 2 other stories I will tell you from informal STEM makerspace clubs with youth, one at the Boys and Girls Club and one at a community center for recently resettled refugee youth. All right, so classroom example first. A little bit of background about the curriculum. So engineering is now officially part of middle and high school and even upper elementary science. If we look at the federal science standards, the what they call the next generation science standards, we can see a new area, which is engineering. And so many teachers are really worried because now they have to teach engineering and a lot of them are unfamiliar with engineering. And many of them are not prepared to teach engineering, right? So in these 2 classrooms, the teachers with university researchers, including UNCG, we plan a 10 lesson, and each lesson can last between 1 to 3 class periods. So in one school, the engineering unit lasted for 3 weeks, where the students engaged in 1.5 hours of science every day during the school week and also in the afternoon. So it's a pretty intense chunk of time where the teachers and the students were piloting this unit. What is interesting about this unit is that we intentionally worked in what we call community ethnography into the curriculum, where the students have to come up with a survey and they survey their school community about what are some issues that are concerning to you in our school community. So they go out and figure out what are authentic issues that is live and current in their school. And then they think about what are some engineering solutions, right, that they could prototype in order to solve these problems. So everything is very local and the data is very driven by the people with skin in the game, right? The kids who are living and breathing, being students in that school. So one of the design challenges, right, is the idea, how can I make my classroom more sustainable? What was really interesting was that the students in all the classrooms that piloted this curriculum really thought hard about what it means to be sustainable. In science, when we think about sustainable, we typically think about, okay, you know, you want materials that are recyclable, you want materials that do not harm the environment. So your typical green energy, you know, recyclable, protect the earth kind of discourse is there. And that is a core part of the curriculum. But the students were also bringing in other issues, right? Other justice-oriented issues into the classroom. So they were saying that it is not sustainable when students have a low morale all the time. It is not sustainable when you are bullied every day, because then you are not in a frame of mind to be learning. And it is not sustainable to be stressed out every day by a lot of homework, because then I don't get enough sleep and then I don't focus the next day, and it is a vicious cycle. So the students were expanding the definition of classroom sustainability in this unit. In terms of the curriculum, the teacher and the curriculum designers told the youth, right, you can engineer anything that solves or attempts to address a community identified issue, right? But in your innovation, so this is where, you know, the science and the standards come in, you have to use a renewable energy source. So you cannot use batteries. You have to make something light up, because we were sneaking in electricity and circuitry into this unit. And, you have to use materials that are readily available at school, right? Again, going back to the idea of recyclability of materials and making what is already there, right? Making use of what is already there. So this first example is called the Occupant. And it is a light up system. You know, when we fly in an airplane and we go to the restroom and you slide the bolt, right? Usually from the outside, you can see the word occupy and a green light. So you know that somebody is in the bathroom. In this school where the project happened, every classroom has its own ensuite bathroom. It's a really strange structural setup. But for safety reasons, and then we can argue whether, this is really the right thing to do, the bathroom doors all do not lock in this school. Because the administrators do not want students to be doing something fishy, according to them, in the bathroom. So the bathroom doors do not lock. And so what happened through the community ethnography is that the students got a lot of data that particular kids were engaging in bathroom bullying. They were barging into the bathroom intentionally when particular students are in the bathroom using the bathroom, right? And so the data was showing that bathroom bullying was happening in their classroom. It was targeted at Hispanic boys. This all came out in the community survey, and that the teacher was completely oblivious that this was going on. So what was happening was that many of the boys who were the victims of such bullying did not use the bathroom and were acutely uncomfortable, as you can imagine, because they were holding for longer than they should, because they didn't want to encounter bathroom bullying. And so this group built what they call the Occupy. Meg, she says, when the lights are on, so you see the 3 blue LED lights, right? When the lights are on, people will know not to come in. We have this sign for reference. And you look at the green cardboard, it says, if these lights are on, please do not open the bathroom door. Mateo, another boy in the group, says, Thomas got walked in twice. Now he never goes to the bathroom. And in the 6th grade hallway, they make up rumors, which is ridiculous, right? The bullies make up rumors. So here is a short video of the kids talking about the project. So it's better to hear from the horse's mouth. So here we go. They also made this video to share with people.
Like do a demonstration.
Yeah, I want to do a demo.
I'll be in here. I'll be in here using the bathroom.
Okay.
Supposedly what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to knock like somebody would answer, or you would slowly open up the door. He just like opened the door carelessly.
Yeah, I would.
Why it is a problem is because
Embarrassment,
that's another one, and like people will start trends around the school, like in this like in the 6th grade hallway. They'll either make up it's either that or they make up rumors. It's ridiculous, and so we wanted to try to stop and other cases prevent that from happening. Mm-hmm. So we just thought like that's a really big problem because.
Someone else was using it, and this way, when the lights are on, you will know not to come in, and then we have this sign for reference. Okay, so now let's show here. Okay, so we have our solar panel right here that's taped to the wall, and the light is making the energy come through.
Just to make sure, and I'm just letting you know, this duct tape doesn't rip off any paint.
Yeah. Again.
Because at first we only started with one light, which I guess for some people it wasn't too bright and not too standing out.
We had it like a darker red, but it wasn't working. And then when it was sort of working,
you couldn't see it.
Sort of couldn't see it.
To think that like the green paper would stick out more than pretty much any other color.
So what do you think she sees in you that she didn't see before?
How well we work together.
And how like the teamwork and like the amount of brains and just ability to do stuff and work.
Like every time when we were working on it, we were a good group because when someone was getting frustrated, another person would take over and like try fixing it, and then when that person got frustrated, the next person stepped in, and we all sort of helped each other when we didn't understand it or anything in the building process. It's been a couple of weeks since the last time someone got walked in.
Okay. So that was the Occupy, and the students kept data when the Occupy was being used about the rate of barging in, and then they could show the data to their teacher that the barging in really went down significantly. They counted the numbers, and the upshot was that the other classes were commissioning this group to build the system for their classrooms because they were also having bathroom bullying. The other point that I want to emphasize is that the science was really evident in the project. Right, so even though the project was solving a bullying issue, right, that was live and happening in the classroom, and that is not something that typically you see in science classrooms, right, that gets talked about. And the teacher herself did not know this was happening, but she was able to support the students in pursuing this community problem. So the artifacts, I know these are really small, but the handouts, you know, the SketchUps, all these scientific activities and exercises that were done in the classroom were integrated with the social issue of bathroom bullying. So the students were talking about, you know, like Meg and Trin, they were talking about it being able to do something that matters, right? Raises class morale and makes us feel accomplished, makes us feel that we are actually doing something. It also validates their personal experiences on barging in, because they realized through the community ethnography, through the survey, that it was not just one person or two person, but it was a trend, right? That many people were being bullied this way, and it is an issue that deserves to be unpacked and talked about. And science class, you know, can be an avenue to do that. The teacher herself, so the boxes in blue are the teacher's reflection. So essentially she was very surprised, right, that this was happening. And she also did not know how to conduct a community survey and have that be something that she does with her students. So she was also learning alongside, right? So going back to the framework, what counts as science or STEM, right? What issues can be talked about in a STEM classroom? What are the activities that students can do? All these are manifestation of rights, right? And in this classroom, they are new rights, right? Because in Miss J's classroom, they never did talk about lives of students outside of science, right? And a lot of the times they were very much engaged in book work, right? Reading about a scientific phenomenon and then writing in packets to answer questions in a way of reading comprehension, rather than hands-on actual building of a prototype that is informed by actual community data. So Miss J, she said, you know, this project, the Occupy, I was not sure that they could get it done, but this project is actually changing my classroom. And in these 3 pictures, I know this is like finding Wally, but Mateo, this boy, you can see that he was going around helping his friends in troubleshooting their circuit. So Mateo became a student who was on the periphery, and that was how Miss J called him. Like, he was not interested in science, you know, he usually doesn't engage, and he sits out in the hallway sometimes. He also has, and this was the teacher's words, a sad backstory, because his parents were not in his life, and he was being brought up by his uncle, who was an electrician. What was really interesting is during this unit, Mateo started wearing his uncle's electrician shirt during science, and walking around and helping his friends troubleshoot their circuitry. And Miss J said, this was great, you know, because I could step back and say, and not worry that I don't know how to fix this circuit, and have Mateo go figure it out, and, you know, and share that responsibility. So how she is as the authority figure was also shifting, right? And then, you know, what was the teacher able to see? What was made visible that previously was not visible, right? How the kids work together, how they were able to solve issues and problems, how you know, injustices were happening in her classroom with the bathroom bullying that she was not aware of. So different kinds of information, right, regarding the culture of the classroom, regarding social dynamics, regarding the abilities of their students and how group work might look like, were all new things that the teacher was learning. Here is another example from another school. It was really interesting that across the projects, across the schools and classrooms, there were many projects that were targeted at bathrooms. So for this project, the girls have a 6th grade girls' bathroom at the end of the corridor of the 6th grade wing in the school. And this school was built in 1950. So all the cubicle doors are really short. And what happens is that the girls were saying, essentially, it doesn't matter whether the door is closed or not, right? Because they hardly cover, like, all their heads stick out above the cubicle door. So there was no privacy. And so the girls were also refusing to go to this bathroom, and would take a long detour to the one ensuite bathroom in the library that the librarian was kind enough to let them use. And that was also what we observed, right? So this idea of lack of privacy in the classroom was the problem that was reflected in the community ethnography. So these 3 girls, they built a bathroom door extender, which they called the Pride Slide.
What's the problem, Lily?
Okay, so we had a problem. We all discussed it in our group. The stalls are too short. Mm-hmm. And we made this prototype out of cardboard. It has a design on the front.
Yep.
And there's lights to stick out the most important parts of the board. It says girl power on the front. And we use copper tape and LED lights, and we're gonna use a battery to light it up. And so, let me show how this works.
Please show us how it works.
Okay, so, thank you.
So you have a panel that can stick up. Oh, I want to see the mechanism. So let me see how you do it, and then we'll close the door and we'll see how far it extends. So show me how you would put the panel up. Let's go to the bathroom.
Wait, sorry.
Yeah, so open the brace. It can go in the back. It can go in the back right here.
Oh.
Right?
So
Yeah, take that out. That's your peg. Is that your peg?
Yes.
Okay, so how would you line it up?
So I'm gonna get these pegs off, and then
Oh, okay. I need to go again. It doesn't make a difference.
are the girls in there? So then you do it like this. Fix the peg.
And then if you close the door, can I see you? Can I then see you? I can't see you anymore. Yay, privacy. Yay! It's kind of cool.
I want to see how it looks.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of your lights on your board?
Well, to stand out.
Girl power. Yes. Very nice. Oops. So what they wanted to do was to extend the height of the cubicle, and they built it out of cardboard, a prototype. And they also wanted to have an artistic element that is to meet the curriculum's criteria of having a circuit, but they, you know, turned it into something that was empowering for girls. They had the slogan "Girl Power." And then if you heard in the video, they were going to use a coin cell battery for the power source, but then they had to use a renewable energy source that was part of the requirement of the curriculum. So that sort of triggered some more thinking of the circuitry, calculating load, how many lights, how many colors, which resulted in choosing a particular solar panel to provide that energy. So again, the teacher, in this case, in their classroom, the teacher was a male teacher. So obviously he had no idea that this was happening, right? But because of the curriculum and because this data point came up in the survey, many girls talked about the two short doors, right, in a girls' bathroom, gave legitimacy to these three girls, Lily, Zari, and Amari, to take on this issue as an engineering project. Okay, so third example, this is at a Boys and Girls Club where a group of students were engaging in also community ethnography, like building and making things for our community. So the background is that the Boys and Girls Club moved from a really old building to a very new one. But the new one, they had to share it with a childcare business. And so the one playground that was in the new facility had a fence around it and had a lock on it. So the children at the Boys and Girls Club were not able to have free access to the playground. And they were able to do that in their old building because there wasn't any other business that was sharing that facility. So what happened was that there was very little access to play, right? To moving your bodies in playful ways in this new spanking building that was very beautiful, but the youth were saying that, oh, there's so many rules, we can't do so many things here. So the youth at the Making Club asked their friends 3 questions. Are you happy with our new club? What do you miss about our old club? And what do you wish we have in our new club? So they went around interviewing the children, and this club serves about 192 kids every day from kindergarten up to high school. The youth in the Maker Club are all middle schoolers, but they surveyed their friends across the age group. So from the data, right, they found that many of their friends were not happy that there's a lack of play. The playground is not accessible because it's always locked, and then we have to share it with the childcare kids, right? And when we do get access to the playground, there's very little time to play because, again, this sharing. They also talked about the fact that they are very young children and they need to move, especially after you've spent, you know, how many hours in school, you go to the Boys and Girls Club, you don't want to just sit still, you want to play around. So this quote really stuck out with this group of girls who built this dome, right? You cannot climb, you cannot lie down, you have to be very careful with the new stuff, the new chairs, new couch, everything is new, and we just feel so constrained, right? So in this example, the children at the club, the community members, the teachers who run the club, right, including myself, and I also pulled some of the people who were in the makerspace in our university to come and help. These were the people who were engaging in science, right, during this making process. So going back to what is relevant to science, right? A lack of play at the club became something that was very relevant to science, to the making, to the STEM that was happening at the club. Again, like bathroom bullying, like too short cubicle doors in a girls' lavatory, are not typical issues that you find in an average science classroom. The lack of play is not a typical issue that you find in an after-school science club. But these very real struggles of the children who were doing the science became very relevant and the launching point of why they were engaging in science. What were the processes of science? I'm sure all of us remember with horror maybe about the scientific method, right? Which is this really inaccurate actually list of steps, right? What is the scientific method? Number one, define a problem. Well, that already is not what scientists do, because you don't define a problem out of vacuum. It's always through experiences and observation where a problem is identified, right? And so the processes of science in this example and the previous two that I shared with you were very different from how science is taught and learned in an average science classroom. The artifacts and the symbols of science, right, in this case, all three of them, were that the youth actually created something that was functional, that was three-dimensional, that worked to address a very particular community concern. Oops, hang on. So if we just look at a picture of the dome, right? It was about 45 pieces, separate pieces, that were measured and cut and stuck together with rivets, right? And tested for structural integrity by lots of crawling in and poking at the inside to see that it holds up. And then they tested it out in the lobby of the club and noticed that the smaller kids were crawling in there to nap, to take naps in the little dome. So then the older girls said, oh, the little kids are napping. We need to make blankets and pillows. So they sewed blankets and made pillows and threw that in a dome. And then they observed that some of the little kids were trying to read in a dome. And so you see this solar panels, they made small LED lights that could light up the inside of the dome. So there were many iterations of improving this structure as the youth who made it looked at how the children at the club were using this particular artifact. Again, right, this is very different from how school science and after-school science clubs run their programs. Okay, last example. So this is also a STEM club, right, that takes place at a community center that serves recently resettled refugee youth. And North Carolina, our state, is number 5 in the total number of refugees that we welcome. And 32% of the refugees that are admitted are under 18. So there's a large number of children, right, who come to North Carolina for asylum. And many of the kids, when they come to North Carolina, I would say that at least for the youth, the refugee youth that I work with, a lot of them are born in a refugee camp, grew up in a refugee camp, so have disrupted schooling before they arrive in the United States. So when we think about, children who are marginalized, children who have a lot of, who may have more challenges, right, integrating into the American school system, I think the refugee children, they are the ones that are the most marginalized, because there are so many experiences that they did not have a chance to experience when they were in refugee camps. So what does it mean then to work towards rightful presence with refugee youth, right? Going back to the idea of who I can be in science, who I want to be in science is very complicated for refugee youth, because a lot of them have not experienced science in any formalized way, right? And a lot of them, the whole impetus of finding security as a refugee, going into another country, is to become, right, like the other countries' norms and practices. You want to become the person with power, because that is your security when you're a refugee, right? Because all you know in your life is persecution. And for some of them, there is a lot of violence that they were fleeing from. And so the idea of safety and really becoming an American, right, is the purpose of why the family made this journey. So here are some pictures of the walls in the Refugee Community Center. There are a lot of educational posters, right, as you can see. There is like lots of vocabulary charts. There is the tutoring schedule. So all these things plaster the walls of the community center. And what I'm suggesting to you in this example is that all these educational posters, they are very helpful, yes, but they continuously signal to the youth that you are a foreigner, right? You need to learn the money system. You need to learn how we use English to talk about the parts of the body. All these things signal to the refugee youth that they do not belong in this space. There is nothing that is artistic or inspirational on the walls. They are all educational posters. Then on another wall, it's all the rules of where they live from the landlord. This is what you can do. This is what you cannot do. This is what you absolutely cannot do, right? So imagine coming into the center every day after school, and this is all you see on the walls. When we think about community, right? For refugee youth, it is also a really, really complicated issue. In the center, right, where they go to, which is an apartment unit in the residence area that they live, there are many refugees from different countries. So there are other ethnicities, right, in the refugee community center. There are many different languages that are spoken. The apartments are really small and the walls are really thin, so there's a lack of privacy. And when we were talking with this group of Korean girls, asking them, so do you feel safe now that you are here in America? Do you feel safer that in this residence community? How are you feeling when you are in schools and you have to speak English and write everything in English? Do you feel stressed out, right? And this conversation only happened after we have worked with them every week for more than 9 months. So the relationship was already there, has been built, right? For us to have this dialogue of really very stressful conversations, right? And so what the girl said, and this quote is really long, right? But I want to draw your attention to the red text. So this is Sloan. She is 14 when she told us about how she feels in a center, right? Where the SEM club is happening. She said the center is very important because of the activities. Because at the center, they get tutoring, right? They get tutoring services from undergrads in our area. So from undergrads from UNCG, from A&T, from Guilford College, they go to the Refugee Community Center to tutor the kids as a part of service learning that they have to fulfill for their university. So Mondays to Thursdays, from 3:15 to 6, the college kids are there to tutor whoever wants to come to get help. In one of the bedrooms in this community center, right, is a technology room where they have 3 desktops. And the refugee children go there to do their homework because they don't have laptops at home and they certainly do not have Wi-Fi. So the center is crucial, right? For them to get help in their homework because English is not their first language, for them to have access to infrastructure and like computing infrastructure because they don't have that at home. But look what Sloan says. It is ugly. The walls are ugly. You have vocabulary posters, you have flyers, you have doctor information, what the landlord say you can do and what you cannot do. And it makes you feel really stressed out when you walk into the center. She said the center should be pretty. We don't want to be stressed. We want to feel relaxed when we come back from school to the center, because school is already very, very stressful. So then we asked them, so what can we do about this rather stressful, oppressive atmosphere, right, of the center? You have to be at the center for the reasons that I've just talked about, but you feel really stressed out in the center because it's not pretty. So what can we do? That's related to making, that's related to STEM. So this launched the project that they decided that they wanted to do. And again, it was a work in progress because they didn't know what they wanted to do. They said we should have something pretty on the wall, which is where we started from. But what that thing is and what to do to create that thing was emergent, right? And took a lot of time. So Zen said, maybe we can have a big painting, but then we are not good artists. She calls them drawers. We are not good drawers. The art, we don't know if it will be nice. So none of them felt that they could draw something and paint something and have that qualify as art that is pretty enough to be hung on a wall, right? So then we think about what it is in STEM and making that we can use to create art that is beautiful, but does not depend on the youth being good at drawing. One of the tools is the spirograph, right? I don't know if you've ever played with a spirograph, but it's really fun. And you create these like intricate patterns, right, with templates. So we spent a lot of time playing with spirographs. And then we also bought a huge canvas and we spent a lot of time with different kinds of paints, right? So the girls were saying, the youth were saying, well, we don't really know what picture we want, but we like blue and we like green. So we're going to paint the background blue and green and then go from there. And in the dialogue that emerged in all these sessions was how they were thinking about what the final piece is going to be. Again, they don't have something already in mind. It was emergent. So the blue and the green, right, Rose was saying, it looks kind of like the earth with the sea, and the green, maybe the mountains. Like you see in pictures from space, you can see that the earth is blue and green. So they were starting to think about a theme. And then in the conversation that continued, they talked about, we traveled, we got on the plane for the first time in our lives and these girls flew from Thailand. They were in a refugee camp in Thailand. We flew from Thailand to North Carolina, and it was really long and took many flights, but we were in the sky, right? We were looking out of the plane window and we saw the earth. So for them, they were starting to think about their journeys coming to North Carolina as they were trying to create this piece of art. So here are some pictures where they are starting to arrange the spirographs that they have made onto the background. And just some of the text is from the conversation, right? They were figuring out the pattern of where all the spirographs should go. So then they thought about lights. So again, here is where the science and the engineering came in, right? They said, if we had lights, it would be so beautiful. Because they wanted to have lights on the piece of art that they were building, there was the motivation to learn about the science, right? Then we spent a few sessions figuring out the circuitry. And you can see from the pictures how they went from simple circuits, right, which is the top picture, where you see many different individual circuits, to the bottom picture where you see more complicated parallel circuits. And then you also see that they were able to build switches, and they learned about what resistors were and how resistors help to channel the electrical flow away from the light bulb so that the light bulb doesn't blow as easily. They learned how to solder, right? And all this was because they wanted the piece of art to look a particular way. The impetus to do the science was in service of the art. And this is the final product. I think it's quite beautiful. And Rami, one of the youth who did this, right? we were asking them, what does this piece of art mean to you? What does it say about you? And this is part of the dialogue that she was talking to us about. She says, the big red one is us or me. Then the ones around it are my family and my closest friends. We know each other and we speak our language. The others are coming to join our community, so we are expanding and becoming more together. There's us and our friends in school who were born here, the citizens of the States, right? Nobody is leaving. We are coming together. It is one world. I want to expand my world, but still be me. So we got permission from the center, the people who run the center, to take down the educational posters from one of the walls. We got permission to mount one world onto that wall. And it was really interesting that a couple of months later, we saw these two posters go up alongside one world. And these are the two posters that show the community, the refugee community members doing something with smiles on their faces. Right? The adults were doing yoga. Then the poster on the right that is half truncated, there was some celebration of their culture that was happening at the center. The other three walls that you don't see are still filled with the same educational posters and the landlord rules. But the girls were starting to, to claim space literally for themselves, right? In making the center pretty, in bringing down the stress factor, right? And so in a way to disrupt the script, right? To disrupt the discourse that they are perpetually foreigners. They are claiming a space for themselves in this refugee center. So I put the quote from Sloan that I read to you earlier, right? And this process was painstaking and took more than 6 months of working with them every week. So this is the penultimate slide. I know I've been talking at you for a long time. So what does rightful presence mean and entail, right? Essentially, what we're arguing for is that having a rightful presence in STEM, in science, is important and central to justice-oriented education. It means that the youth can bring in issues that they care about, issues that are often mired in injustices, and make that central to why they want to engage in STEM. More than equity as inclusion, students are no longer positioned as guests, right? They rightfully bring what they want to do, the issues that concern them, into the STEM. And what we've written about as signature science artifacts. So all the 4 pictures from the 4 projects I've shown you, shared with you today, really are signature science artifacts of the creators, of the youth who made them, right? It is informed by what they're concerned about, and they were really intentional in what they want the artifacts to do and to say, and where they want the artifacts to be, right? To precipitate the kinds of social interactions that they hope the artifacts would catalyze. So let me end with a quote from Jennifer. So Jennifer is an 11-year-old African-American girl, and what she innovated was she built a light-up system for a scooter that is powered by solar panels, where the electricity could be stored and used to light up at night, light up the scooter at night when the kids were using the scooters to go around because the bus system was terrible. So we asked her, what would people say when they see this solar panel light up system that you built? And she said, people will love it. They'll say, who made this? It was me, the tiny person in the background. And I'll say, yeah, I did that. This girl knows how to have fun, how to get down and smart when she really needs to. She could make the world a different place and help everybody else learn how to have the type of fun she has. Little kids can do ginormous work. And so going back to how I started this talk, the really depressing numbers, the really dismal labels, the idea of high need schools, high need students who cannot achieve. And yet we see that when given support and when given the space, right, to bring their voices, bring their concerns to amplify what matters to them, that the students who historically have been marginalized can do really amazing, ginormous work. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can answer any questions you may have.
You ready for questions from the audience?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Tan, I wanted to thank you for this wonderful presentation. My question is, you're working with students of, it looks like probably middle school age group, pretty much. Have you seen any results? How long, first of all, how long have you been working with them? And have you been working with them long enough to follow them through after they finished high school, maybe gone to college or whatever?
Yeah, so some of the youth I started working with some of the youths in 2007 when they were middle schoolers in the Boys and Girls Club in Michigan. So we've kept in touch, and from the first cohort of youth that I work with, which is probably about 12 core groups of youth, 4 of them are first generation college students, graduated from college. 1 of them graduated with an engineering degree from Michigan State. 1 of them who was a refugee got a full scholarship to Tufts University. 1 of them got a full scholarship to Harvard. And 1 of them graduated from Notre Dame and is pursuing a master's degree in health sciences. So these are like the success stories, from following the youth. And I'm not making any claim at all, right? That is because they were participating in an after-school STEM program for some of them 5-6 years. Like they came back to the program and was first youth leaders and then mentors to the younger kids who were in the program at that point in time. So yes, I have followed some of them. Also, a healthy group went to community college and are working. Some of them are parents. So I do follow some of them.
Thank you. I gotta unmute yourself, Goldie.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you so much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I see so much value in what you were saying. I was interested in the topic, just the topic. And I think what you're saying is we have to go beyond. But the real challenge that we have is that racism is so alive in the country that it is hard for folk to overlook it. Teachers can have the best hearts, but there's so many things that have been just a part of the culture and a part of the labels that they have for African Americans and for those who may be refugees or whatever, that it causes a real problem. And I don't know how we're going to get over it. I do know that those children, so I've taught many years, and I know there's some students that are brilliant, and I often think about the fact that we had George Washington Carver, who came up with all those things, ways to use the peanut. And I keep saying there's got to be more scientists besides George Washington Carver. And so I'm glad that you and your colleagues are trying to make this known to as many educators as you can. But the big challenge that we have is a challenge that faces this country, and it makes it very hard to overcome. But thank you so much for sharing what you all have done with your research.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's systemic racism that has permeated the education system, and especially in science and technology, where the injustices are just really apparent. But again, like you said, right, Ms. Goldie, it's really hard to see because it has been normalized. And we also cannot expect teachers to be able to, just do something about it, because the teachers are also in the system and have, that it's hard for them to see as well. So the whole idea of, teacher preparation, what that means, do we talk about just how to teach science, or do we talk about how systemic racism is alive and well in science education, and how to do it in such a way that is productive, right? And does not make teachers defensive. It is something that's really difficult to do, but necessary.
I encourage you not to give up on your quest, though. Don't give up.
I won't. I won't.
Can we help people to be colorblind? We don't know, but keep trying, okay? Keep trying.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Tan, what can we do as members of the League of Women Voters and individuals to help in this program or help you continue your program?
Wow, that's really generous of you. Can I sit on it before
I'm not making
before I
any
give
promises.
you my wish list? No, I mean, this is really helpful already, right? Thank you for giving me the time and the opportunity to share this work. A lot of times it's really hard to challenge the narrative of, as long as all children have X, right? X being the latest educational textbook or the latest toolkit, then all is well, right? The idea of one size fits all does not work, and has never worked for the past 40 years with all the education reforms. And it's really hard to think about what that then means, right? Because it's like, as a society, as people in education, we have to face up to the fact that 40 years of investment and we're still back in square one, right? Because the root problem of historical injustices and how that is differentially felt and experienced by particular groups of students is something that is uncomfortable and not acknowledged. Even in teacher prep programs, right? Like Colleen and I, we know how hard it is to engage in those kinds of conversations. But yet, it's a scab, right, that we have to pick because we've just band-aided it, and it's just festering. Nothing good is coming out of that.
Yeah.
So I think engaging in uncomfortable conversations like this is a very productive way to get people to think about, what does it mean when there are achievement gaps? What does it mean that, the yellow and the black and brown children are always not performing? Why is that? And what is happening in the environment that is, precipitating this? It's not that it can't be all the black and brown and yellow children are, not clever or do not have abilities. We know that it's not true.
Yes, one of our founding members of the Education Roundtable, who would have loved to have been here tonight but wasn't able to due to some family commitments, was Dot Kearns. And one of the things that she constantly says is that these children, there's nothing wrong with these children. They just come usually from a poor environment, they're poor. They're just poor, and they have so much potential. And if we let them use that potential, then they will grow and be successful. But I think a lot of times some of us look at children and think, well, there's too many things against them for them to ever succeed. And you're proof that is incorrect.
Yes. That their poverty has nothing to do with their brain. And,
No,
and
exactly.
the teacher, and I say teachers, the end product of teaching is learning. And when your children don't learn, you haven't done a great job at teaching. And that means you have to use a whole bag of tricks to get to some of them, but they're able to learn. And we could dispel the notion that poverty equals inability, you know, and that certain looks that spells inability, and it is not true. It's just not true. And I need to get on my other Zoom call. But thank you so much. I enjoyed.
Thank you for being here. Thank you.
All
it was
right.
nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too. I'll meet you in person, and we can do.
Oh, I love
you
that.
Here, yeah, because you're here at UNCG.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, and I'm on city council, and also interested in how we can change some of the thinking at some of our schools in our district, because I'm in one of the lower economic districts, and there seems to be lower achievement in the schools in my area, and I'm concerned about that. Hope to meet you soon.
Yeah, we'll have coffee.
Carolyn. Thank you.
Any other questions for Edna?
I have a quick question. My question is, what kind of pushback do you get? And I can imagine that there's pushback from having to cover the core curriculum. This is learner-based learning. That happens in its good time. You know, it takes the time that it takes. And, you know, it doesn't follow end of year testing deadlines, that kind of thing. Plus, I can imagine that you also get some pushback from some parents, depending on what environment you're working in. Thank you.
Yeah, really good question. So let me answer the easy one first. I have not had any pushback from parents. And I think it is because I work with youth whose parents are working 2 to 3 jobs, you know, but who care deeply and who come and see what their kids are doing when they pick them up from the clubs. And the parents are usually really enthusiastic, you know, about the kinds of engineering or STEM that their kids are doing. So the parents have been wonderful, really, and very supportive. I do get some pushback from teachers, right? And understandably, because teachers are under a lot of stress and they have, you know, the principal and the coaches breathing down their necks. And so what has been really helpful is our research team has been fairly successful in getting big grants from the National Science Foundation to fund this work. And we intentionally, and I think this is the right thing to do to be really ethical, we write in a very healthy stipend for teachers to participate, because we're asking teachers for their partnership, and teachers are professionals. You know, teachers give out a lot of their time to, you know, essentially play with us and figure out new curriculum, right? And they take a risk because they have to get permission from their principals. It is a political undertaking, right? They could be at risk for being sanctioned by their principals, you know, their salaries could be docked, that kind of stuff. So having financial stipends to really honor the time and the expertise of teachers goes a long way in sort of like, not to bribe them, definitely not, but to give teachers a chance to breathe and come and figure things out with us, where they don't have the pressure of, I need to, you know, be on this page with the pacing guide. And what that means also is that in the grant, we write in enough money to pay for substitutes for the teachers to teach their lessons when they are with us doing professional development, you know, figuring out the curriculum. Because Guilford County has this ridiculous rule that if you go somewhere as a teacher, right, to do whatever, even if it's professional learning, teachers have to pay for their own subs out of their own salary. So who is going to do that, right? Some of them do, but our teachers are so poorly paid in North Carolina already, right? And very few teachers would do that. I'm going to pay for my own sub so that I can go do professional development. It's not something that is ethical, I feel, that we expect of teachers. So having the financial support, having leverage of the social capital of the National Science Foundation goes a long way. And I'm an introvert, but I'm pretty shameless in the way I go and talk to principals, and I will say that, I'm a professor from UNCG. I have all this funding from the National Science Foundation. I would like to work with your teachers. Here are all the fabulous things that we can buy and bring. I'll bring your teachers to conferences. They will present, and your school will be highlighted. So all the marketing, in a way, that assuage the principals that this is something that would benefit the principal as well, is something that is integral to doing the work. So, so the idea of the allied political struggle, bringing the stakeholders, it's not just the teacher, it's the support system in the school that they have to support the teacher in doing this work. So all the people have to be part of the conversation. So I think so far, that approach has been working.
You having any trouble with COVID being in the schools?
Oh, yeah. I mean, COVID has, the whole of last year, the middle schools that I was in, they couldn't do the curriculum at all, right? Because the kids were doing remote learning.
Yeah.
And we toyed with the idea of making individual engineering kits so that we could send back to the children, to the students. But the teachers were saying that that was too difficult to monitor. And so they would rather wait until all the kids are back to do the curriculum. So we have teachers who've taught the curriculum 3 years, 4 years, and are really invested in it because they see the learning. And the kids who do this engineering curriculum actually do better in the test than the kids who did not do the curriculum, right? In terms of the content test. So the teachers are convinced that this kind of learning is impactful. Yeah, but COVID has really thrown a wrench in the works.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. My last doc student, Chris Kirkman, wanted to do work in Guilford County schools for his dissertation, and they wouldn't let him do it because they're not letting anybody in.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Right.
You have a question from Lou and Rudy Gord.
Okay. Rudy Gord, breaking into the League of Women Voters folks, I guess. I was lucky enough to get to teach in a program, SEED program, you may have even heard of it, and CTF program in California way back in the 60s. And it allowed very creative kind of questioning of students going into disadvantaged schools, in my case in Southern California. So I'm absolutely convinced these kinds of things work. Mm. But when it got around to proving that what you were doing worked, you had to go back to standardized tests and all of that kind of thing. And it was very clear to me from the students. They even told me, we liked it when you came and we were exploring and we don't like taking the test. But so it kind of repeats another question that was being asked. I was held up my hand, and you've said some things about it, but I must say, I would say we've known for a long time that this kind of more creative teaching helps in science and mathematics. In my case, I was a math graduate student and have taught at Guilford College for a number of years to teachers. And it just seems like teachers often are not allowed to do the kind of things you're doing. And I certainly wish they were, and I wish you luck in, leading to a system where there is more of that kind of thing. I can add that I do think mathematicians are finally getting it, though, that they've got to work with these various groups and are doing so. It's very visible. it is very visible in the world of mathematics and long needed. I'll just add that. So I'm hopeful.
Oh, I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you. It's at least mathematics is, you know, making some progress. Some of the sub-disciplines of science are still really elitist and gatekeeping. So they need to learn from the mathematicians, I think.
Yeah, especially for the engineering part of it.
Oh, yes.
My dad was an engineer.
So, are there any more questions from anybody? Well, Dr. Tan, we want to thank you so much for being here tonight and giving us all of this wonderful, informative information, lots of things that we had never even thought of about, and wish you success with continued success with your program, and we hope to hear from you again. Colleen, go ahead.
Go ahead. Thank you, Edna.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good evening.
It was really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Jane, as always. You're our savior.